Make a list of the top 5 people in your network. This is what I call the value list, and rank them not in order of money, not in order of celebrity status or any other metric. Rank them simply in order of generosity, how much they pour into you.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Brenden Kumarasamy. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Brenden. 1, his YouTube channel, MasterTalk, has over 24,000 subscribers, and he uses that to offer free communication skills. 2, he, as a coach, executive coach, he coaches ambitious executives and entrepreneurs to become top 100% communicators in their industry. And 3, Brenden speaks 3 languages and he can karaoke in 8. Don't know if I want to test that today, but it could be a fun meeting when we meet for coffee or beer. Brenden, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hey, it's good to be on, George. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to be talking with you. And Brenden, your YouTube channel, MasterTalk, you offer tips on communication, not only for entrepreneurs and executives, but also for family members, children, people who are growing their careers, just to help them communicate more effectively. Why? Let's just start with that. Why do you believe that the ability to communicate is important to everyone?
Absolutely, brother. So the way that I think about this, George, is communication is so much more than giving a presentation at work or doing a job interview. It's every interaction we'll have with every human being we'll meet for the rest of our lives. It's the way we talk to our families. It's the way we order food at a restaurant and we talk to the waiter. It's the way that we travel where we meet strangers we don't know. We have to speak their language and figure out how to talk to them so we can have a good time. Communication, once we realize, George, is not just about increasing the bottom line, but leading a fulfilling life. That's when we start to take it more seriously. And the question to think about as we get this conversation started, George, is how would your life change if you were an exceptional communicator? A lot of us dream about our vacations. We dream about the expensive things we want to buy, but we don't dream hard enough about a world in which we're a great communicator in it.
And that is something that, you know, I've never heard anyone say, I wish that the world was better at communicating. However, it would be a powerful change, positive change. There are so many troubles in the world today on many different scales that if only we could communicate better, we wouldn't have to have all the trouble.
I agree. I feel that the world is very divisive right now for reasons that don't really make sense, because at the end of the day, we're still all watching the same movies. We're still sitting on our couch on a Sunday looking at Netflix all day. We're still going on Facebook every day. Like, we have a ton of similarities, but the media seems to emphasize all of the small pieces of our lives that are completely different. But once we start to listen to those differences, I believe that the world would just be better for sure.
Now, I heard an interesting point in there that I want to bring out and emphasize. The media makes news because of differences, and we have problems with other people because of differences. However, if we can only emphasize the similarities, then we would have so much more together.
I completely agree. And by the way, it's normal that the news only emphasizes the difference, because at the end of the day, the news is incentivized to make money. And what happened in the past, George, as you probably know, is, the incentive system made sense to tell the truth. There wasn't a lot of news channels, not a lot of newspapers. Today, media companies like CNN and NBC and MSNBC need to compete with Netflix. They need to compete with TikTok for attention. And similarities don't sell. Positive news doesn't sell. Negativity, stereotypes, extremism, that's what sells. And that's what gets people to watch. And that's also what is our downfall in many ways that leads to a divisive world.
And in our journey to become better communicators, I imagine what we need to do more of is find, discover, and enhance the similarities.
Absolutely. I definitely think that's one part. And the other part is what I call questions versus statements, George. The problem with most communication, doesn't matter who you are, what you believe, where you are, it's this idea that most communication in the world is statement, 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 statement. What does that mean? That means, let's say we're talking about something. John might say, I believe this. Laura might say, well, I believe this. And then they just do a ping ponging of statements. Whereas what you're doing a wonderful job here, George, is you're doing something different, which is instead of responding with statements, you're actually responding with questions. So when we get to a place where somebody asks as a statement and the other person says, why do you believe that? Why is that important to you? Why do you find that fascinating? If we just improve the ratio of questions versus statements, that would automatically improve the communication skills of everyone around us. So just ask yourself every day, how many questions am I asking to other people? And oftentimes you'll find that answer is either 0 or 1. So you need to increase that every day.
And it might be difficult for some people to ask more questions because they might believe that asking questions is a weakness.
That's an interesting thought. I definitely feel that is true for some cases. I think it starts with something easy. I'm a big fan of easy wins. So it doesn't necessarily need to be questions like to get help or anything. It could just be questions that you would be fascinated to answer yourself. I'll give you an example. So the questions I ask people, obviously in the context of a podcast, I got to answer them. But you know what I mean? Outside, let's say we're getting coffee or something. I would say, hey, like, George, what are you excited about right now? What are you passionate about? What's your dream? What's your vision? These are the questions I care about. But for somebody else, it's going to be something different. It might be their favorite TV show. It might be their favorite movie. But the trick here, George, is to write down the questions that you wish other people asked you, and then ask, like, for example, why do you ride a motorbike and garden in the same day, right? So those questions, and then you ask them to other people. That's it.
And that is interesting, and yeah, I suppose you're right. The things I would want people to ask me are, what do you enjoy most about summer? Well, I enjoy riding my motorcycle, and I enjoy gardening, and I enjoy sitting in the backyard and just admiring the garden.
That's it. We start there. So it's not like we're asking help or anything, or we're showing weakness. It's more about, let's take a little bit more interest in other people than we normally would. That's all.
Now, Brenden, let's take that and look at how the workplace is changing, the communication, and we've gone through the work from home during the pandemic, and now people are starting to get back to the office, back to the workplace, back to real meetings, but not entirely. There's going to be, it's going to be different. It's not going to be the way it was. What communication challenges do you see people facing when they're, we just coming out of this virtual? Some of it's like this, some of it didn't, and now we've got to go back to in person and still go back to virtual. What do you see are the challenges people will face?
Absolutely, George. So the way that I see it is it's two faceted. So prior to the pandemic, we had the technology tools to give virtual presentations, except the user adoption of those presentations wasn't super high because people would just go, I'd rather meet in person. And the same thing in business. Well, I don't mind spending $5,000 on a business flight to go close a $5 million deal. It's fine. What the pandemic did is it normalized and forced us into a digital way of doing things. So you didn't have the option of taking that flight anymore. You had to close the deal over Zoom. But what's happened post-pandemic is a lot of people are realizing that, oh, wait a second, I don't have to spend $5,000 to take that flight anymore. I don't have to spend time away from my kids. Sure, there's some things I'll still need to fly out for, but not all of those things. So what does that mean for the future? That means a hybrid world. Online communication is here to stay, but it won't be as poignant as it was during the height of the pandemic. So it's going to be a mixed world. What does that mean for the person who's listening to this podcast, George? It means you need to be great at both, not just in person, but also virtual. And how does that conversation start? That starts with learn how to master one setting at a time. So if you didn't take advantage of the pandemic and you didn't get really good at virtual presentations, I would start the conversation there because you're still going to have virtual meetings every week, even if you're back at the office. A lot of my clients are telling me that it's not fully back at the office unless you work in like a manufacturing industry. It's like half office, half off. So what does that mean? That means get used to staring at the camera lens. So your eye contact is good. What does that mean? It means show up at the same energy as if somebody who's in the same room as you. And number three, it also means get on phone calls with your audience, talk to them, get to know them so you can deliver a better message online and then go offline.
Are you suggesting that if we're planning to have a virtual meeting, whether it's Zoom, Teams, Google Meet, that with somebody new that perhaps it'd be a good idea to have a phone call first?
Absolutely. So not always, not in always cases. I'll give you one specific one where I think this is apparent. We can't do this with every meeting. Is let's say we have a town hall meeting that we have to give virtual. Let's say with the CEO of the company, you're talking to 50 people. Well, what happened in person, George, is if you wanted feedback, you could just get lunch with these people because they're just in the same room as you, and you can sit them down and say, what else would you change? How would you make this better? But in the online world, there's a lot more friction because the call just ends. So you can't really talk to them. So I would say for your high stakes presentations, the things that you really want to keep iterating, that you find yourself repeating over and over again, like the vision of the company, the town halls, a very important deal. I would encourage you to try and bring some of those relationships on the phone or in person just to ask them questions. That's what the purpose of that meeting is. Like, what would you change? What would you do differently that would normally happen organically in person that you can't really do virtually unless you force it?
The important conversations, naturally you want to have them face to face. I can't see anyone, for example, making and this goes to the personal communication. I can't see anyone making a marriage proposal through Zoom.
I'm sure it's happened.
It's probably happened. Has someone done it? That kind of different, but there are important. And for example, during the pandemic, I imagine that many people have had job interviews virtually, which has got to be challenging because you want to be in the same room with people. You want to pick up on the body language. How can we decide if we've got to choose to meet in person or to have a virtual meeting or to have a phone call? What are the criteria that we might consider to prioritize our best way of contact?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's the approach I take with relationships, George. I call this the value list because I feel a lot of relationship is not well understood. Think of it like this. Let's say we meet somebody new every few days, which is not likely. Most of the time we don't meet somebody new every few days. But let's say we did that for a year. 365 days in a year. Let's say you meet 100 people, give or take. And let's say we do that for 50 more years. So let's say we're 30 years old right now and we live until 80, though I hope people live longer. And this is the only math test today. The only math question is if you have 50 years and you multiply that by 100 people, that's only 5,000 people, George. So the question you need to ask yourself is not how do I get everyone to like me, but rather say, who do I want those 5,000 people to be? Now the question changes a lot. So what does that mean in the context of your question? What that means is you need to rank your relationships. Make a list of the top 5 people in your network. This is what I call the value list. And rank them not in order of money, not in order of celebrity status or any other metric. Rank them simply in order of generosity, how much they pour into you. And then once you have those 5 people, then you use the right tactic to stay in touch with them. And honestly, for those 5 people, I always make it a point to try and meet them in person. But if not, you just pick the medium that works for them. Zoom and phone calls are fine too.
Brenden, I haven't heard that before, and I'm intrigued by that value yardstick. Rank people by who are the most generous to you, and this doesn't mean money. This means generous to you in terms of giving you energy, inspiration, who you really like talking to, being around. They make you feel good. You could be totally down, and they call you, and you pick up the phone, and suddenly you just come alive.
Absolutely. And yeah, the reason you haven't heard it is because I kind of made it up in my basement one day and I felt it was really helpful. So essentially what this is let's go back to the principle, George. Why do I like this strategy? Because of the following. The biggest mistake that people make with relationship building by far, it's like not even a contest, is they take their winners for granted. They take their winners for granted. The biggest mistake everyone is listening is making right now, 100% of the time, is the best relationships in their network they're not pouring into. And instead of doing that, they're running around to the next event, the next person, the next new shiny object, versus going and saying, hey, that vice president really helped me out. I wouldn't have gotten that job without him or her. Oh, my mom is really amazing. Like just because here's the secret to relationship building, George. Over deliver for the top people in your network, and they'll just introduce you to the top people in their network. Those are the people you want to meet, right? Like for example, in my top 5 right now, one of them I met because of somebody else in my top 5. So number 3 on my list, Sam, introduced me to Billy, who ended up being number 2, right? So that's the key. I never would have met Billy if it wasn't for Sam. But the point I want to drive is here's another principle I want to throw down. Generosity is not enough. Generosity is not enough. If you think being a generous person is enough to build a strong network, you're wrong, in my opinion. It's important to be generous to other generous people. Now it's different, because if you're generous to other generous people, that's when your network really starts to multiply on top of each other. It starts stacking, because if you help other generous people, they're just going to lift boulders for you. Whereas I think the problem with most of us, whether it's with our relationships, our family, the people around us, is we're pouring into the wrong people, George.
And I suppose the lesson there is we can't treat everyone the same, because there are people who will steal too much energy from us. If the same generosity doesn't work with everyone. And I suppose, too, what I'm hearing there, be generous to generous people because they'll give back, versus don't waste your time being generous to takers. The takers, the ones who are always suspicious of everything, who are sarcastically complaining all the time. Don't talk to those people. Don't hang around with them.
Absolutely, George. I call this go the extra meter for everyone. So give to everyone, but don't fly out for them. Don't go do their groceries. Like, go the extra mile. I mean, the meter, which means, okay, send them a podcast episode that'll help them. Send them a quick text, answer quick, maybe send them a voice note or something, but go the extra 10 miles for the top people in your network. So my version of this is not go the extra mile for everyone. It's go the extra meter for everyone, which is a meter more than most people, by the way, because most people don't do anything for other people. So just going the extra meter helps you stand out, and then go 10 miles for the people who are really pouring into you.
Powerful advice already here. And if we take nothing else from this podcast, I think that this is the most important advice that we've heard. And what appeals to me, Brenden, in that is that you're not telling us to be bad, not to mistreat people, to treat everyone well, and treat everyone a little bit better than they might expect, but don't pour our heart into people who will just steal it. And, however, do pour our heart into those who will give theirs back to us.
Absolutely, brother. That's always been my principle. For me, what I love is about my approach is that you don't take people for granted anymore, especially the best people. Like for me, my business partner, my mom, my sister, I'm always finding ways to over deliver, because I think of it like business. If you don't deliver for the customer is just going to go somebody else. Let's say we take Blockbuster and Netflix. Okay, Netflix is just easier than Blockbuster. I don't want to wait in line anymore. I don't need this tape. I don't want these late fees. So we're done. So Blockbuster went bankrupt and they lost. I think of that every day in the context of my personal relationships. The only reason I've gotten the success that I've had relative to my age is because I ranked and stacked my network in the way that I showed it to you. And this is my approach. Communication and having a network, a strong network, is like a sports team. If you're delivering more value than everyone else, you deserve better people around you. But the opposite is also true. If you're not pouring into people, if you're not helping, if you're not generous when somebody calls you on a podcast, if you just go, oh, buy my book, buy this, and you're not actually helping people, then you don't deserve better podcast appearances. You don't deserve better opportunities. You don't deserve better people in your network to help you. And that's the key. So if you're the most generous person and you pour into the right generous people, my God, you'll have an army to support you to be successful. And I'm thankful that I made the right moves to get that as well.
When people head back to the workplace, how can they apply that principle? Because they might have to work with people who they don't like.
Absolutely. I worked at IBM for a few years, and thankfully, surprisingly, which hasn't been my experience in the past, the culture that was really good, but there's always some bad apples. So here's my approach always is focus 80% of your energy on the people you really like, so that it balances out the 20% of people you're forced to talk to because your job demands it. So there's no way to get around that. But I think the key is it's all about energy distribution. What does that mean? That means the people you don't really like, keep it to the minimum. Don't go to socials with them. Don't do the extra stuff you don't need to do, but do the business, treat them well, smile, finish the Zoom call, just do what's important. But the people you love at work, those people go to the socials, spend more time with them, get to know them, pour into those people. And that's the key. That was my approach in corporate as well for my next promotion back when I was playing that game anyways, where I was like, okay, there's 10 executives. 2 of them don't want to talk to me. 6 of them are really nice, which is very rare, by the way. It's like that was just a unique culture. That's why I give them credit. And then 2 of them I was indifferent about. Okay, I'm not going to pour into those 4 people. I'm just going to focus on the 6 that really. And then 1 out of the 6 really, really likes me. So I'm going to pour more into that person. I'm going to stay the extra night, light the candle lit, the lamp, stay the extra hours for that specific executive because I know it'll pay off for me. So it's the same thing. You got to put your chips in the right place. So when your promotion comes up, the person advocates for you and is a staple for your success in the company.
And I can see that where a person is mid-career and they're looking to see who their potential mentors, who their potential champions might be within the hierarchy of the organization and channel their energy. However, what about the team leader? And where the team leader needs to manage and work with everyone on their team, whether they like it or not, do they apply the same rule with their energy to their team members?
I love the nuanced question, George. Here's what I would say. There's professional and there's personal, right? So what does that mean? That means you need to treat everyone fairly. I think there's a difference between treating people fairly and treating people in a way that brings up your energy. So I'm not a big fan of favoritism in that specific context where you treat other people better. That's not what I mean. I think it's more in that context. It's more about saying, play fair. Like if somebody you really like isn't performing at the job, you got to treat them fairly. If somebody you really don't like is crushing it at work, like absolutely, you have to reward them for it. But I think what I mean is you need to find opportunities, whether it's in the workplace or outside of it, to re-energize yourself from the people you don't really like spending time with. So an example for me at work is sure, there's some people I really loved at work and there's some people I didn't, but I wouldn't go out of my way for the people I managed. I wouldn't go out of my way to spend more time with them. Whereas the people I really liked, I would technically go out of my way. I wouldn't like host hidden gatherings or something where like other people aren't invited, but I would have one-on-one dinners, 2-on-1 dinners, small lunches with the people I really enjoy spending time with. And that always re-energized me for the people I used to manage at work.
Spend the extra time with the people who give you energy so you can feel better when you manage those who steal your energy.
I mean, it's tough. Obviously, life has changed for me because I'm a business owner, so I can just hire people I like that are also talented. But you're absolutely right, George. In the corporate setting, I'm empathetic to that. You got to play politics. You got to balance. There's some things you just got to deal with. That's why you get paid a stable check, right? There's pros and cons to everything in life, but you got to manage it in a way that makes you successful. But I'll also add the caveat: if you feel it's just overwhelmingly negative, then you need to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself a much more important question, which is why the hell are you still working there? And then you got to apply elsewhere.
And that's a good question that one needs to ask from time to time, and I've certainly asked that question from time to time in my corporate career as well. And there are times when, I'm only staying here to pay the mortgage, and as soon as I find something better. Managing energy. Now, when it comes to managing energy, have you noticed that the virtual presentation, the virtual communication, even though it should be theoretically a lot easier because here we are, we're sitting in our chair, we're at home, we don't have to travel, we don't have to commute. This should be a lot easier on our energy drain. However, it seems to drain even more. Why do you think that is?
Fascinating question. The way I think that is that there's a special connection when you meet somebody in person. I'm sure you felt this in your life at multiple times, George, where you're talking to somebody and you feel like that you've known them your whole life, even if you just met them. Those feelings you can get virtually, but it's not as emphasized or as extreme when those endorphins are pumping when you're meeting somebody in person. So even if you're the most introverted person in the world, if you meet someone you really, really like, there's some energy exchange that does refill your cup. But that energy exchange is not as intense when we're on screen. So for example, and I'll give you a big reason for that, it's touch, right? So when you're talking to somebody, let's say I'm in person, I'm always like, touching somebody's shoulder, like, dude, not in a weird way, but you get what I mean. It's like, it's a part of human connection. It's a part of, hugging people, talking to them, shaking their hand. But that interaction just doesn't exist virtually. So there's no endorphins that keep escalating over time. So I think that's the reason, but it's a fascinating question that I would need to keep rethinking it. But that's my immediate thought. What's yours? I'm curious.
Well, I think you're right when it comes to the senses, and touch is one of them. But I also think that when we're with someone, we pick up on temperature. Yeah. We pick up on smells. We pick up on sounds that are outside the conversation, depending on the setting. And I think that stimulates us and gives us energy, especially when you're in a room. When you're in a room having a meeting, you can look around. You see people. You might see them fidget. You might see them perk up. You might see them, and you pick up on that, and it might not even be direct touch, but it could be a matter of, okay, there's paper that gets handed around, or there's a prop that someone uses, and all that is stimulus, and the stimulus, I think, generates energy.
I love that. I love that perspective as well.
And now, what does that mean to people when they go back into the workplace? If they had a set of rules for, okay, when I'm in an online meeting versus an in-person meeting, what should I do differently?
100%. So there's three key differences. The first one is eye contact. So when you're virtual, George, your eyes generally just stay in one direction, which is the camera lens, whether you're speaking to one person or 10,000. But in an in-person meeting, let's assume 6 to 8 people for the purposes of this podcast, you have to move your eyes across people. Because if you're just looking in one direction, most of them are going to be like, oh, did this person care about me? Does this person? And the human beings start to invent stories in their mind around why you're not looking at them. Human beings are fascinating creatures. So that's the first thing, is I would start there. The second difference between online and in person is there's less friction to get feedback. So in a virtual meeting, if you want to get feedback on how it went, things we could do differently, you have to really sit them down one-on-one, get a Zoom call. It's a lot more formal. In person, you'll say, okay, guys, how did that go? What can we do next time? It's a lot more, I don't know what the right term is, but it's a lot more vivacious. It's more live. It's more it's within the energy. It's in the flow of the group. Whereas on virtual, it's not as cool. It's not as interesting. That's probably the second key difference. And then the third difference is the follow-up. So the follow-up means if you're in a meeting with somebody in person, I mean, you guys can hang out after the meeting, right? You can get some dinner after. It's a lot easier. It's much harder virtually. So my best bet now, I gave different advice at the height of the pandemic, but I'll say my advice now is if you're having too many virtual meetings with your team, try and find a way to meet them in person if you can. If you can, if not, do the virtual social hour if you want. But ideally, you want to try and get those things back in person. And one special tip I'll give that a lot of leaders I coach don't really do enough is if you all have a fully remote team, write down everyone's location so that when people join the company, introducing the people in their own city so that at least they can meet in mini groups. I'm so surprised at the fact that nobody really takes that extra step, and it really makes a difference.
So we can encourage people, even though they might be remote from our corporate office, they might have neighbors that they could get together with a small group and build that rapport and energy amongst them. So
Absolutely.
that when they come into the virtual meeting, now they go, oh, I just had coffee with him yesterday. And I suppose that any team leader who has who continues to meet virtually could encourage their staff to do that. Say, hey, there's two of you in the same city. I encourage you to, why don't the two of you meet and come back with a plan and present it to us at the next meeting.
That's it.
Brenden, you offer free resources to people who want to improve their communication skills, and the place they can find that is at your website.
Absolutely, George. Yeah. So at rockstarcommunicator.com, you'll find access to a ton of free trainings that we do on communication. We have a Zoom call that I do every few weeks. I facilitate it. So for those of you who are interested, feel free to register for it, and it's completely free and it's fun and it's interactive, and I hope to see you there.
That's the site, rockstarcommunicator.com. You find more tips and ideas from Brenden. Brenden, as we prepare to wrap up, if you could sit down and give advice to team leaders as they try to manage and enhance their communication among their team in this hybrid workplace, what might be that 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice that you would give them? And maybe it's something you've said already.
Absolutely. I call this my easy threes, George. So these are 3 easy exercises that team leads can do so that they can improve their own communication, which then inspires their team members to improve theirs. Number 1, the random word exercise. Pick a random word like fruit, like jaguar, like headset, wall, and create random presentations out of thin air. And one thing I recommend on top of that, start your meetings that way. Make it fun. So that way everyone's learning communication, not just you. So one thing a lot of my leaders do is they start their call the first 5 minutes. All right, guys, let's do a few random words and let's start the meeting. So people get really comfortable with uncertainty, and they have fun with it. That's number 1. Number 2 is the question drill. We've all been in situations where we get asked questions we don't know the answer to. George asked me a couple of good ones on this one that never been asked before, right? So there's always situations where you're going to get questions. So how do you solve for that? Every day when you wake up for 5 minutes, just 5, reflect on one question you think the world will ask you, whether it's around work, your family, a team member, and try and reflect on the answer before the question even gets asked. And if you do that once a day for 5 minutes, after a year, you'll have answered 365 questions. You'll be unbeatable. That's number 2. Number 3, the third tactic, George, is I'm sure you repeat it every episode, but it's so simple that nobody does it. And it's sending video messages to your team members. I am shocked, George. I ask this question all the time. I say, how long have you worked in corporate? Somebody goes, 13 years, 7 years, 5 years, 2 years. And I go, how many videos have you ever received in your career, not today or this week, in your career, where your manager, your supervisor sent you a 20-second video message just saying something super simple, nothing specific to you, just saying, hey, George, just want to wish you happy holidays. I love all the work that you're putting in. Keep it up. That's it. The answer is always 0. Be the person who does it for other people. Because if you are, you'll stand out. And I'll end with this principle, George. If you communicate 20% better, not 200% better, not 200,000% better, If you communicate 20% better than your competition, you will stand out 100% of the time. So if you implement the easy threes, you will 100% stand out from your industry if you do it.
Powerful and practical advice. Thank you, Brenden. My guest today is Brenden Kumarasamy, reminding you to improve the ratio of your questions to your statements. If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.